In today's podcast, I want to talk about addiction and pain because I think addiction and pain are linked. When we are in pain, we can easily become addicted to things. They're like our spiritual bandage, as I've said before. And I think if you have any addiction, whether it's big or a small addiction, I think you need to stop worrying about the addiction, whether it's alcohol or drugs or food, gambling, whatever your addiction is, and start looking inside yourself and try and work out what the pain is. Now, the pain will be usually emotional, mental, or psychological. You might be able to track and know which one it is. I think mostly it's emotional with people, it's emotional pain, and it comes from something from either their childhood or early experiences, and something was happening to them that was emotionally painful for them. It could be that they were in an abusive situation, it could be neglect, it could be emotional abuse, which you can't really see as a child. And it could be that you grew up with parents or in a family where they used conditional love. So they loved you, but when you didn't do the right thing, you got punished, which caused, of course, pain in you, and you did not get rewarded in any way. Therefore, you were ostracized, you were isolated, you were punished. And then when you did as you were told, they would give you love again. But as soon as you did something wrong, they would punish you again. That's conditional love. And that creates huge damage, massive damage in children coming out of these conditionally loving homes. We're not saying the parents don't love you, but it is a switch on and it's a switch off. And while you're switched off, the child is in terrible emotional pain. Sometimes, and most times, they don't really know what they've done wrong. They just know they've done wrong, and you don't love them right now, which is emotionally painful for that child. And that, in its sense, creates trauma in the child, emotional trauma, because children need stability and they need to have security. So from an early age, if you were brought up in that kind of environment, you will maybe suffer from addiction later. The other one is trauma, and this can be a trauma from abuse, it can be from neglect, it can actually be from living even in a war zone or being fostered out and having to live in different homes. It creates emotional trauma. So we've got this pain, this emotional pain from when we're little, then we've got the emotional trauma, and then we grow up. And unfortunately for many of us, we will then attract people who have the same behaviours toward us, so that we'll end up in situations where we're getting more emotional pain and more trauma from being in certain situations and with certain people. And that drives the addiction. The addiction is just a band-aid. I always call it like a spiritual band-aid. It's a soul band-aid. We have the addiction because we, in so much pain, we sometimes don't even know we're in pain. It's become so accustomed to being in pain or carrying the trauma. It's almost like we don't see it, like we're almost blind to it now. But we know it doesn't feel good. And the only thing that will make us feel better will be to have a drink, to smoke, to take some drugs, to take some pharmaceuticals, to gamble. For in that time when you're doing that, the pain is sort of anaesthetised a bit and we feel a little bit better. It's like we alter things for ourselves. It alters the biology and also then it also alters how we feel. If you have addictions, you have to stop blaming yourself, you stop punishing yourself. You're a person who is suffering and you're a person who's in pain. And because you're a person who's suffering and in pain, instead of being mean to yourself and feeling ashamed of yourself, you need to get help to release and let go of the emotional pain and the trauma and the suffering that you are in now, because that's what's actually making it worse. There are many things we can do for this, and I've talked about it before. I find the tapping really good, to do emotional freedom tapping, and you can Google that. You can also do some meditation where you let go of the pain that you're carrying, the emotional pain that you're carrying, the psychological pain, the mental pain. You can use kinesiology and you can ask your own body whether it's physical, emotional, mental, or psychological pain. You work out which one it is and then you work on that. You can do self-hypnosis to release it. You can go and do breathwork or rebirthing. That's another way to release it. You need to let go of the pain. And when you let go of the pain, and And sometimes you have to kind of feel it as you let it go. And you'll always know when you're being successful with these modalities because you'll often cry or sigh a lot, or you'll do a lot of big yawns, which means the body's releasing. And in those ways, you know you're letting it go. Journaling is also good to write about how painful it was, how much you were hurting, how much you suffered, how traumatic it was for you, and how you felt about that. These are the areas to go to if you're addicted to things. That's what I'm trying to say to you. And you're to stop judging yourself and being mean to yourself. You already probably had people who've already been mean to you, so don't double up on being mean to yourself. You've just been damaged. And that's the thing, you've probably got emotional damage and mental damage and psychological damage, and you're damaged. So you want to heal, you need to fix the damage. Talking to other people can help as well if you can find a good counsellor or therapist to go to talk about it, see if you can get them to help you pull out these feelings. Because what we're trying to do, instead of ignoring them and when they come up, covering them over with some kind of thing to, I don't know, band-aid it, we want to actually get rid of them. We want to acknowledge that we're in pain, we're traumatised by the event, we're really suffering from the event. We want to acknowledge that, and then once we acknowledge that and release it, then our need for the band-aid will be less. Because we only need these things when things go really bad. And you'll actually see that if you look, and you've ever watched movies and the person's having a really bad day and they come home and the first thing they do is have a drink. And that's the form of addiction. They're suffering, right? We've got this really big suffering thing and they're carrying it and they don't know, they don't want to live with it and they don't know what to do with it. So they just sort of put something on it to anaesthetize it. That's what you're doing. The most important thing you have to do is face it, feel it, and release it. That's what I'm trying to say in this podcast, that you need to release it so you don't suffer as much. And then everything else isn't needed as much. You won't need it as much. You won't need to overeat. You won't need to swallow it down with huge amounts of alcohol because you're in pain. Our society doesn't talk about pain. They talk about if you hurt your leg, of course, but they don't talk about emotional pain, and they definitely don't talk about trauma. People don't ever talk about trauma. It's one thing I noticed. And if you've come out of any abusive households, you will have those things. Abuse, trauma, emotional pain, suffering, they're all in the same basket. So any kind of abuse that you've come out, you will have emotional pain and suffering, and you will need to get healed to heal that. Because what you're really looking for is healing. When you go for that drink, you're getting like a mini healing, aren't you? Or when you eat all those biscuits, you get a little mini healing. Or when you take those drugs, or when you're pharmaceuticals, you're getting a mini healing, but it's not actually healing her. It's just giving you a little mini time out. Whereas if you can let go of the emotional pain, and all the pain that you're carrying and all the hurt, and then if you let go of all the suffering and the trauma, then you've now have an opportunity to actually get healed because you're not carrying that around with you. And my heart really goes out to you if you have addiction. And I think that a lot of people don't really understand what you're going through and why you have an addiction. But I'm telling you why you're having it, and I'm telling you how you can fix it. So you need to understand that you're in pain. When I check with my energy work, when I check people who are having trouble with alcohol or drugs or smoking or eating, whatever their addiction is, and I go to them, they always have a lot of emotional pain. That's what I found, and trauma. They're the two things I find, and emotional damage. A lot of emotional damage and often psychological damage. So that's where you need to go, to those areas. You can heal from this. You can let it go. And the other thing is that by letting these emotions go, you're less likely to get sick later, because these can often be the precursors to other illnesses. Do the work. Accept that you've probably got emotional pain, even though you kind of, it's almost like when you grow up with it and the trauma, I know it sounds strange, but it's like you don't feel it because you're so used to being like that all the time. But once you start releasing it and you're crying and you're sobbing and you're writing your journal and you're reading it back to yourself and you're crying your eyes out, then you know it's there. Because I always maintain we never cry tears that we don't have already inside. And every time you're crying, I want you to think, that's great, a little bit more is out of the bucket. So every time you're crying, every time you're getting upset and you're doing the work, every time you're releasing it, don't see it like you're a wimp or you're negative about yourself. See it like good. These are the uncried tears. These are all the uncried tears. And the more I cry them out, the less baggage I have. So that's my message for this week. It's kind of powerful stuff. And it's sad stuff too, really. It's sad that people hurt other people or go through experiences that are so painful for us and create so much trauma and so much suffering. But it's not until we let go of these things that we can really heal, and that's what I'm encouraging you to do. So use the modalities I talked about, find the ones that work for you. And if you can go to also someone who's an energy worker, someone who does either massage and get massage because you can release it that way, or someone who does Reiki or healing, these things will help to release this deep stuff. There are people who have often said, masseuse, that they have people on the table and they start massaging and the person just starts crying. And that's because it's locked in the body. And when they massage it, it's unlocked and it is released from the body. Also use meditation if you can. If you can meditate and go into that space and ask your guides, angels, your God, however you see your faith, to help you let go and to be healed from it, to let it go now. Because it's safe now. Because if I'm talking to you on this podcast, you're a grown-up. So it's safe to let it go. It's not until we let go of all that we can actually heal. We cannot be walking around carrying it and heal. We just can't. You have to find ways to release it and let it go and let go of your suffering. That's why it's such a big deal for me to do release work. And they say we are what we release. And there's a lot of truth in that, because the more we release, the more well we will be. So I'm hoping you can do this, and I'm wishing you lots of good release work this week and lots of love and lots of healing.